For 23 years, Dr. Angela Matthews had studied police department culture from the outside, writing academic papers about institutional bias and discriminatory practices. But today, she was experiencing it firsthand as officers dismissed her stolen car report with eye rolls, sighs, and barely concealed contempt. They saw a welfare queen wasting their time. She saw a department that was about to get a very new kind of leadership, starting with her husband, who would be sworn in as police commissioner tomorrow morning, armed with her detailed report of exactly how his officers treated citizens they deemed unworthy. If you believe that every citizen deserves equal treatment regardless of their appearance or perceived social status, hit that subscribe button right now and tell us where you're watching from, because this story will show you what happens when systemic discrimination meets real accountability. The Metropolitan Police Department's front desk buzzed with the usual afternoon activity. Officers came and went, phones rang constantly, and citizens waited in uncomfortable plastic chairs for their turn to file reports or seek help. The fluorescent lighting cast a harsh glare over everything, making the already intimidating environment feel even more unwelcoming. Dr. Angela Matthews stood quietly in line, clutching a manila folder containing all the documentation about her stolen car. At 45, she was a distinguished professor of criminal justice at State University, with a PhD from Yale, and over 2 decades of research focused on police-community relations. Her academic work had been cited in dozens of studies about institutional bias in law enforcement, and she had testified before congressional committees about the need for police reform. But today, none of that mattered. Today, she was just another black woman in a modest coat and worn shoes, trying to get help from a police department that had already made assumptions about who she was and whether she deserved their attention. Angela had deliberately dressed down for this visit. As an academic, she understood the importance of experiencing the system as an ordinary citizen would. Her husband, Robert Matthews, was set to be sworn in as the new police commissioner tomorrow morning, and she wanted to assess the department's culture firsthand before he took over. What she discovered would shock even her. Despite years of studying discriminatory policing practices, the theft of her car had been a genuine crime. Her vehicle had been stolen from the university parking lot 3 days earlier. She had security camera footage, witness statements, and all the proper documentation. By any measure, this should have been a straightforward police report. But from the moment she approached the front desk, Angela could feel the dismissive attitude of the officers on duty. Sergeant Dale Williams, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for cutting corners and an attitude problem that had resulted in multiple citizen complaints, was working the front desk. He looked up as Angela approached, his expression immediately shifting to one of barely concealed irritation. "Yeah," he said, not bothering to look up from his paperwork. "What do you need?" Angela opened her folder and began to explain. "Good afternoon, officer. I need to file a report about my stolen vehicle. I have all the documentation here, including—" "Hold on," Sergeant Williams interrupted, finally looking up with obvious annoyance. "Stolen vehicle? When did this supposedly happen?" The word supposedly hit Angela like a slap. In her years of research, she had documented exactly this kind of language, the subtle ways officers signaled that they didn't believe certain citizens or take their complaints seriously. 3 days ago, Angela replied calmly, maintaining her professional composure despite the disrespect. "I have the security footage from the university where it was taken, witness statements, and—" "University?" Williams snorted. "What were you doing at a university?" Angela paused, recognizing the trap. If she mentioned she was a professor, it would change the entire dynamic of the interaction. But that wasn't the point of this exercise. She wanted to see how the department treated ordinary citizens who didn't have titles or credentials to demand respect. "I worked there," she said simply. Williams exchanged a look with Officer Martinez, who was standing nearby, pretending to organize files, but clearly listening to the conversation. Both men's expressions suggested they found this claim dubious. Williams said, with obvious skepticism. "And what kind of work do you do at this university?" The question was loaded with assumptions and bias. Angela could hear what he was really asking. What would someone like you be doing at a university? It was exactly the kind of discriminatory questioning she had written about in her research papers. "I prefer to focus on filing the police report," Angela said diplomatically. "I have all the necessary information here." But Williams wasn't finished with his interrogation. "Look," Ma'am, we get a lot of people coming in here with creative stories about stolen cars. Usually turns out they forgot where they parked, or maybe the bank repossessed it, or there's some family drama involved. You sure this car was actually stolen? Officer Martinez snickered audibly from his position near the filing cabinets. 2. Other officers who had been chatting nearby had stopped their conversation to watch the interaction, their expressions ranging from amusement to outright contempt. Angela felt her academic training kick in as she observed the group dynamics playing out in front of her. This was textbook discriminatory policing, the assumptions, the skepticism, the barely concealed mockery. She was witnessing firsthand the exact behavior she had spent years documenting in her research. "Officer," she said, maintaining her calm, professional tone, "I have video evidence of the theft, witness statements, and all the proper documentation. This is a legitimate crime report." Williams leaned back in his chair and sighed dramatically. "Ma'am, we're really busy here with serious crimes. Are you sure you can't handle this through your insurance or something? I mean, do you even have insurance?" The assumption was clear and insulting. Williams had looked at Angela, a middle-aged black woman in modest clothing, and decided she was probably unemployed, uninsured, and wasting his time with the false report. Officer Martinez decided to join the conversation. "Sergeant Williams, maybe she should try the community center. They have people who can help with these kinds of situations." The coded language wasn't lost on Angela. These kinds of situations meant situations involving black people who officers believed didn't deserve full police service. People who can help meant social workers, not police officers, because in their minds, Angela's problem wasn't a real crime worthy of police attention. Angela opened her folder and pulled out a clear photograph from the security camera showing her car being stolen. "Officers, I have clear video evidence of the crime. This is a black Honda Accord, license plate number." Williams barely glanced at the photo. "Yeah, okay. We'll look into it. Just fill out this form and we'll get back to you." He slid a generic incident report form across the counter without even taking down basic information like the license plate number, description of the vehicle, or the location where it was stolen. It was clear he had no intention of actually investigating the crime. Angela looked at the blank form, then back at Williams. "Shouldn't you be taking down the specific details? The license plate, the location, the time of the theft?" Williams rolled his eyes. "Ma'am, that's what the form is for. You fill it out. We'll process it when we get time. Like I said, we're busy with real police work." The phrase, "real police work," was the final insult. Williams was making it clear that crimes against people like Angela weren't considered real police work. They were inconveniences to be processed with minimal effort and forgotten. But what these officers didn't know was that their dismissive treatment was being witnessed by someone who could end their careers. Angela had heard enough. As an academic, she had all the data she needed about the department's culture. As a citizen, she had been failed by the officers sworn to serve and protect her. As the wife of the incoming police commissioner, she had gathered intelligence that would reshape the entire department. "I see," Angela said quietly, taking careful note of each officer's name tag and badge number. "And when can I expect follow-up on this investigation?" Williams shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on our workload. You might want to check back in a few weeks." Officer Martinez couldn't resist adding his own comment. "Assuming it's even worth investigating. Half these stolen car reports turn out to be bogus anyway." Angela nodded slowly, making mental notes of every detail, the dismissive attitudes, the coded language, the failure to take basic information, the assumptions about her credibility. It was all being cataloged by someone who understood exactly what it meant and had the power to do something about it. "I understand," she said calmly. "One more question. Who is your supervising officer today?" Williams looked annoyed by the question. "Lieutenant Parker, but he's busy with real police matters. This isn't the kind of thing that needs to go up the chain." "I see. And could you give me your names for my records?" "It's on our name tags," Martinez said sarcastically. "Can't you read?" Angela smiled politely and wrote down both officers' names and badge numbers in her notebook, along with the time, date, and witnesses present. The officers assumed she was just another frustrated citizen making empty threats about complaints that would disappear into bureaucratic oblivion. They had no idea they were being evaluated by someone who would be sitting across from the police commissioner at dinner that evening, discussing the cultural problems in his new department. As Angela left the police station, she reflected on the experience. In 23 years of academic research, she had read thousands of complaints about discriminatory policing. She had interviewed countless victims of police bias and indifference. But experiencing it personally was different. The casual cruelty, the assumptions, the complete disregard for her dignity as a citizen. It was even worse than her research had suggested. That evening, Angela sat across from her husband Robert at their dinner table, reviewing her notes from the day's experience. Robert Matthews was a distinguished law enforcement professional with 30 years of experience, including leadership positions in 3 different police departments. He had been brought to Metropolitan PD specifically to reform a department plagued by scandals, low community trust, and numerous complaints about biased policing. "Tell me about your day," Robert said, as he did every evening. Angela opened her notebook and began to read. "At 2:15 p.m., I approached the front desk of your new police station to file a report about my stolen car. Within 30 seconds, Sergeant Williams had already made assumptions about my credibility, my employment status, and whether I deserve police service." She continued through the entire interaction, noting every dismissive comment, every assumption, every failure to follow basic police procedures. Robert listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. "They never took the license plate number?" he asked. "Never even wrote it down. Williams handed me a blank form and told me to fill it out myself. No investigation, no follow-up plan, no basic police work whatsoever." Robert sat back in his chair, processing what he had heard. "In 30 years of police work, I've seen a lot of bad policing, but this is exactly the kind of systemic discrimination that destroys community trust." Angela nodded. "It's also exactly what I expected to find. My research predicted this kind of treatment, but experiencing it firsthand was still shocking. Tomorrow is my first official day," Robert said quietly. "I think it's time for the department to meet the new standards they'll be operating under." The next morning, Metropolitan Police Department buzzed with anticipation about the new commissioner's arrival. Robert Matthews had a reputation as a reformer, and many officers were nervous about what changes he might bring. Some welcomed the prospect of new leadership, while others resented the implication that the department needed fixing. Sergeant Williams and Officer Martinez went about their regular duties, completely unaware that their treatment of Angela Matthews the previous day had been reported in detail to the incoming commissioner. They had already forgotten about the welfare queen who had wasted their time with complaints about a probably fake stolen car. At 9 o'clock a.m. sharp, Commissioner Robert Matthews walked through the front doors of the police station, accompanied by his senior staff and several representatives from the mayor's office. He was a tall, commanding figure with an air of quiet authority that immediately commanded respect. The first stop on his tour was the front desk area where citizens filed reports and sought help from police officers. Williams and Martinez happened to be on duty, going through their morning routine without any particular urgency or attention to detail. "Commissioner Matthews," said Lieutenant Parker, the desk supervisor, "this is our front desk operation where we handle citizen complaints and reports." Robert nodded, observing the setup carefully. "How do you ensure consistent, professional service to all citizens?" "Well, sir," Parker began, "we have standard procedures that all officers follow." "Sergeant Williams," Robert interrupted, addressing Williams directly, "what was your most recent citizen interaction?" Williams straightened up, suddenly realizing he was being evaluated by the new commissioner. "Sir, yesterday afternoon I helped a woman file a stolen car report." "Tell me about that interaction." Williams glanced nervously at Martinez, trying to remember the details of what had seemed like a routine, forgettable encounter. "Well, sir, this woman came in claiming her car was stolen. I gave her the proper forms to fill out. Did you take down the vehicle information? License plate, description, location of theft?" Williams hesitated. She had the forms to fill out, sir. That's not what I asked. Did you personally take down the basic information needed to investigate the crime?" The question hung in the air as Williams realized he was being questioned about specific police procedures he had failed to follow. "Sir, I gave her the forms." "Officer Martinez," Robert said, turning to the other officer involved, "you were present during this interaction. Did Sergeant Williams follow proper procedures for taking a stolen vehicle report?" Martinez looked like a deer caught in headlights. He had no idea why the new commissioner was asking about this specific case, but he could sense that something was very wrong. "Sir, we were busy with other duties." "Answer the question." "Were proper procedures followed? Not exactly, sir. The next morning, when the new police commissioner walked in, the entire department was about to change forever. Robert nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone. I'm going to call Dr. Angela Matthews, the victim in this case. She's a professor of criminal justice at State University, and she happens to be my wife. The color drained from both officers' faces as the implications of Robert's words sank in. The woman they had dismissed and disrespected wasn't just any citizen, she was the commissioner's wife, and apparently someone with expertise in exactly the kind of policing failures they had demonstrated. Dr. Matthews, Robert said into his phone, could you join us at the police station? I'd like you to explain to these officers what happened when you tried to file your stolen car report yesterday. 20 minutes later, Angela walked through the front doors of the police station. Williams and Martinez watched in horror as the woman they had treated with contempt and disrespect was greeted warmly by the commissioner and introduced to the assembled staff as his wife and a respected academic expert on police community relations. Dr. Matthews, Robert said formally, could you please describe your experience yesterday when you attempted to file a police report? Angela pulled out her notebook and began to read her detailed account of the interaction. Every dismissive comment, every assumption, every failure to follow procedure was documented with academic precision. As she spoke, the assembled officers began to understand the magnitude of their failure. At no point, Angela concluded, did these officers take basic information needed to investigate the crime. They made assumptions about my credibility based on my appearance, questioned whether the crime had actually occurred, and suggested I should seek help from social services instead of police. In my 23 years of research on discriminatory policing, this interaction was a textbook example of biased law enforcement. The silence that followed was deafening. Williams and Martinez stood frozen, realizing their careers were likely over. Lieutenant Parker looked sick as he contemplated how this would reflect on his supervision. Robert addressed the assembled officers. This interaction represents everything that's wrong with this department. It demonstrates bias, unprofessionalism, failure to follow procedures, and complete disregard for citizen dignity. It's exactly the kind of policing that destroys community trust and brings discredit to law enforcement. He paused, letting his words sink in. Sergeant Williams and Officer Martinez, you are suspended immediately pending investigation. Lieutenant Parker, you will report to Internal Affairs to explain your supervision of this unit. And to everyone else, this is your introduction to the new standards of this department. What happened when Angela revealed who she really was will make you question everything about police accountability. Over the following weeks, the investigation into the front desk incident expanded into a comprehensive review of the department's citizen service practices. Angela's detailed documentation of her experience became the foundation for identifying systemic problems throughout the organization. Robert implemented immediate changes to citizen service procedures, including mandatory body cameras for all front desk interactions, regular supervision of citizen encounters, and comprehensive bias training for all personnel. The department's culture began to shift as officers realized that their treatment of citizens would be monitored and evaluated. Sergeant Williams was terminated after the investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior and citizen complaints that had been ignored by previous leadership. Officer Martinez was demoted and required to complete extensive bias training before being allowed to return to duty. Lieutenant Parker was transferred to a position where he could not supervise citizen interactions until he demonstrated improved leadership skills. But the changes went far beyond individual discipline. Angela's experience had provided a real-world case study of exactly how discriminatory policing operated in practice. Robert used her detailed documentation to develop new training programs that showed officers the impact of their biases on real citizens. 6 months later, the Metropolitan Police Department had been transformed. Citizen satisfaction scores improved dramatically, complaints about discriminatory treatment dropped by over 60%, and community trust began to rebuild. Angela's stolen car report, which had been dismissed and ignored, became the catalyst for departmental reforms that affected every citizen interaction. The academic paper Angela eventually published about her experience became required reading in police academies across the country. Her first-hand account of discriminatory policing, combined with her analysis of how institutional change could address these problems, influenced police reform efforts nationwide. The lesson these officers learned about respect and service would transform not just their careers, but the entire department. A year after the incident, Angela was invited to speak at the police academy graduation ceremony. Standing before a class of new officers, she reflected on the journey from victim of police bias to catalyst for systemic change. When I walked into this police station a year ago, she told the graduates, I was treated as less than human because of assumptions about my race, my social status, and my worth as a citizen. The officers who failed me that day forgot the most basic principle of law enforcement, that every citizen deserves equal protection and service under the law. She looked out at the young faces in the audience, many of them representing the diversity that the department was working to achieve. But this story isn't just about individual officers making bad choices. It's about systems and cultures that allow bias to flourish unchecked. Real change happens when departments commit to accountability, transparency, and continuous improvement. The new officers listened intently, understanding that they were inheriting a department transformed by the consequences of discrimination and the commitment to do better. Remember, Angela concluded, every citizen interaction is an opportunity to build trust or destroy it. Every assumption you make, every judgment you form, every word you speak, it all matters. Because in a democracy, police officers are public servants, and every citizen, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their circumstances, deserves your respect and your service. Commissioner Matthews watched from the audience as his wife delivered the message that had become central to his department's mission. The woman who had been dismissed and disrespected had become the voice of reform, the symbol of what law enforcement could become when it truly served all citizens equally. The stolen car report that had been treated as worthless paperwork had become the foundation for transforming an entire police department. And the officers who had learned to see beyond their biases and assumptions had discovered what it truly meant to serve and protect their community. In the end, the greatest lesson wasn't about individual accountability or personal consequences. It was about the power of systemic change, when leaders commit to rooting out discrimination and building cultures of respect. Angela's experience had shown that real police reform was possible, but only when departments were willing to confront uncomfortable truths about their own practices and commit to becoming worthy of the communities they served. The Metropolitan Police Department became a model for law enforcement agencies across the country, demonstrating that acknowledging past failures was the first step toward building a better future. And it all started with one woman who refused to accept that she didn't deserve the same service and respect as any other citizen in her community. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave a comment with your city. Remember, every comment is a voice, and every voice is a change. What about you? Have you ever encountered such an event or situation? Write a comment. We want to hear your story.